I always thought the night shift was just quiet. Dull hours punctuated by the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sigh of the building settling. But that night, something felt different. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. Pale beams of streetlight flickering through the mist. My footsteps echoed softly on the cold floor, mingling with a distant, almost imperceptible rustling. And then I noticed it. A shadow lingering just beyond the corner of the reception desk, moving against the rhythm of the light. My heart slowed, a quiet tremor settling in my chest. The air felt heavier, almost dense, as if someone or something was breathing just behind me. Every instinct told me to look, to move, but my body froze. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, until the shadows shifted, and I felt a cold gaze pierce straight through me. That's when I saw it, just for a moment, and realized the night was far from empty. The building was colder than I remembered. Even the key felt heavier when I turned it. The glass door side opened, a long, tired sound, and the air inside didn't move. Just stillness, and that quiet hum from the fluorescent lights above, faint, uneven like a throat trying not to speak. I hung my coat on the rack near the reception desk. The place always looked different at night. Smaller, yet somehow endless. The walls felt closer, but the hallways stretched out like tunnels, their ends swallowed in a gray blur. My footsteps echoed. Too loud for carpet, too clear for an empty building. The clock on the wall blinked 11:47 p.m. I was early. There's something about empty offices at night. They stop feeling like workplaces and start feeling like waiting rooms. But I couldn't tell what I was waiting for. I turned on the small desk lamp. Its light spilled in a soft circle, pale and warm against the paperwork stacked beside the phone. Outside the circle, everything faded to blue. The window reflected me faintly, like a half-remembered face. But when I moved, the shadow beside my reflection didn't. I froze, just a breath caught in my chest. It was probably the coat on the rack. I told myself, just the shape of it. Still, the way the shoulders curved felt wrong. I reached for the desk phone, mostly for comfort. The receiver was cold, too cold, like metal left outside in frost. The hum above me flickered, a small tremor in the light, then steady again. I started logging the overnight entries, typing quietly, each keystroke sharp in the silence. For a while, it was almost peaceful. The rhythm of the keys, the hum of the lamp, the soft whisper of wind pushing at the glass doors. But then, a creak, low, from the far end of the corridor. The kind that doesn't happen unless someone's walking. I looked up. The hallway lights were dim, motion sensors slow to respond. For a second, the dark there looked thick, like water, not air. I told myself it was the building settling. Always is. Always something simple, until it isn't. I tried to go back to typing, but my hands wouldn't move right. Fingers hovering, waiting for something I didn't understand. The light above me flickered again. This time, it didn't come back right away. For a few seconds, I sat in that faint gray darkness, watching the glow from the monitor stretch across the desk. That's when I saw it. A shape leaning just beyond the lamplight, like someone standing too still, too patient. No movement, no breath, only the outline of something tall. The light buzzed again, and the shape was gone. I could still feel it, though, like warmth leaves behind a trace. This left a chill. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, a hint of rain-soaked metal. The kind of scent you notice when someone's been standing in the doorway too long. I wanted to check the cameras, but the monitor on the side desk, it was already on. I hadn't turned it on. Static blinked across the screen. White noise, then a frame. Reception. Me. Only I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the reflection of the front glass, a faint outline moved. Just once. A step closer. I turned around so fast the chair rolled back and hit the wall. Nothing there. The lamp flickered one last time, and steadied. Silence pressed back in. I sat there until my pulse slowed enough to think again. Then I laughed, quietly, just to hear something human. The sound felt thin in the room. I closed the logbook, wrote the time, 12:03 a.m. That's when I noticed it. The chair by the door, the one that always faced the wall, was turned toward me, and the faintest hum, just beneath the electric buzz, sounded like someone breathing. I didn't look again. Not that night. The clock ticked on, steady and small, and somewhere in the building, a floorboard creaked, as if something finally decided to move closer. The hallway stretched longer than it should. Its fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting pale rectangles across the faded carpet. The air was still, but heavy, like it had been holding its breath all day. I walked slowly, letting each footfall press into silence. The papers I'd left on the desk rustled faintly in the draft from the slightly cracked window. Even the air felt different here, colder near the walls, warmer in the center, like the building had its own pulse. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate, footsteps, not my own, slower than mine, measured, behind me. I stopped. My breath filled the quiet too loudly. The footsteps didn't. They waited. I tried to tell myself it was the echo from earlier, the old pipes shifting. But they weren't random. They were deliberate. Following, I turned slowly. Nothing. Just the corridor stretching into darkness. The pale light from the ceiling fading into shadow. The carpet fibers pressed into my shoes differently. I could feel the difference between my steps and theirs. Soft, steady, patient. I started walking again, each step tense, each shadow along the wall flickering, bending strangely. Every so often, I glanced behind me. Nothing moved, but the footsteps continued. I reached the elevator. The metal doors were cold beneath my fingertips. I leaned in, listening. A soft click on the other end of the hallway. A pause. Then another step. Closer. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and face it. But something held me. A weight in the pit of my stomach that made me small, quiet, like the building itself was telling me to wait. The light flickered above the elevator. It drew a shadow across the wall. And for a moment, I thought I saw someone leaning from the corner. Tall, still, watching. I exhaled slowly. The hallway smelled faintly of paper, dust, and something metallic, like wet iron under old floors. The scent clung to the air, thickened by the silence. I moved toward the break room, hoping someone else might be there, hoping the footsteps were just a trick of the mind. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Empty, but the faintest lingered, like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. The footsteps started again. Not behind me this time. They echoed along the tiles, soft but deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, cold sweat prickling along my spine. They weren't moving toward me. They were moving around me. I could feel them. The air shifting near my shoulders, the carpet vibrating beneath. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't. I stepped into the kitchen area. The faucet dripped slowly, the water collecting in the sink with a muted rhythm. I held my breath, trying to match its pace, trying to convince myself I was imagining the steps. A chair scraped, soft, almost polite. The footsteps paused. I wanted to look, to see who or what it was, but the shadow in the corner, thin and elongated, made me hesitate. They started again, moving closer, circling, patient. Closer, a whisper of movement against the wall. I finally dared to glance back over my shoulder. Empty hallway, but the feeling lingered, like someone had pressed a hand along the small of my back and left it there. I swallowed. The metal of the sink was cold beneath my palm. The hum of the lights wavered. The building seemed to breathe around me. Then it stopped. The footsteps vanished. No echo, no trace, nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. The drip of the faucet counted time. The hum steadied. The shadows fell back into their corners. I touched the wall. The paint felt rough, uneven. The air smelled only of dust now, no iron, no wetness. I sat on the edge of a chair. Alone, the hallway stretched silently beyond the break room, and somewhere just out of sight, I knew it waited, not moving, not leaving, just there. I didn't move for a long while. I didn't breathe too loudly. The clock ticked on, and slowly, the building exhaled around me. The footsteps were gone, but the memory of them, soft, deliberate, patient, lingered, like a shadow pressed lightly against my shoulder, even when the light was pale and steady. The office felt colder that night. The window panes were slick with condensation. small beads of water tracing slow paths down the glass. Outside, the streetlights cut through the fog, thin and trembling. I walked toward the lobby, shoes soft against the carpet. Each step made the silence heavier. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed low, uneven, almost like a heartbeat. Then I saw it, in the reflective glass of the reception door, a figure standing behind me, tall, still, watching. I froze. The reflection was faint, blurred by condensation, but the face was clear enough. A pale smile stretched across lips that should not have been smiling. It didn't reach the eyes. The eyes were empty, cold, like fog over a dark pond. I turned slowly. The hallway was empty. Nothing moved. Only the faint hum of the lights pressed against my ears. I looked back at the glass. The reflection was gone. No shadow, no movement. Just me. I stepped closer to the window. The glass was cold against my fingertips. The faint smell of damp carpet mixed with the sharp tang of metal from the elevator doors nearby. For a moment, I thought I saw it again, the same pale smile, watching from behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Empty. I swallowed. My hand shook slightly, pressing against the glass. The air felt thick, heavier than usual, as if something had pressed itself into the hallway, just beyond reach. I took a breath. The reflection did not return. The hallway stretched, pale and silent. I walked slowly toward the break room, hoping the figure had been a trick of the fog outside. Every step echoed too loudly. The carpet fibers caught at my shoes. The walls seemed to bend inward, leaning closer with each footfall. I stopped by the water cooler. The drip from the faucet hit the metal sink, cold and sharp, breaking the quiet in small, measured pulses. I tried to steady my breathing. The smile haunted the back of my mind, lingering like a taste you cannot swallow. Then the glass trembled, not the window this time, the small mirror above the sink. The reflection flickered, pale and uneven, and for a heartbeat, I saw it again, watching me, smiling. I blinked, and it was gone. A shiver ran down my spine. The air smelled faintly of damp paper and iron, like someone had stood nearby for too long. I turned back to the hallway. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching toward me. Each one seemed alive, breathing with the building itself. The smile lingered in my mind, not on any face I could see, only in the reflection of glass, slipping away whenever I looked directly. I moved back toward the desk, fingers brushing over cold papers, smooth and dry. The hum of the light steadied. The fog outside pressed faintly against the windows. I paused. The building felt too empty, but the air was thick, almost watchful. For the first time, I realized it might not be trying to hide. It only wanted to be seen. Quietly, patiently, a pale smile waiting just behind the glass, only appearing when I wasn't ready. I pulled the chair closer to the desk, sat down. The reflection remained still, hidden. The clock ticked, slow, methodical. The streetlights outside swayed gently in the fog, their glow soft against the glass. And somewhere behind me, just out of reach, I could feel the presence of the smiling stranger, not moving, not leaving, just waiting. I did not turn again. I did not breathe too loudly. The office hummed, the shadows leaned, and the smile waited beyond the glass for the next time I might glance. The night was quiet, too quiet. The office lights hummed a soft, low vibration, steady but uneasy. I sat at the security desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The monitors glowed faintly, casting pale rectangles across the walls. Outside the windows, fog pressed against the glass, thick and unbroken. The screens flickered. Just a moment, then again longer this time. Corridors appeared, empty at first, but the angle seemed wrong. Walls stretched farther than they should. Corners bent into shadows that didn't belong. I leaned closer. The hum of the monitors mingled with the faint, cold draft in the room. Each flicker left a whisper behind, a residue in the air that made my skin crawl. Something moved. Not on the cameras, I recognized. Not a person, just a shape, shifting in the deepest shadow of the hallway. Slow, deliberate, like it was testing the edges of the frame. Static blipped across the screen. White noise hissed softly, barely audible. It obscured the shape, then let it come back, taller now, leaning closer, the corners of the hallway bending toward it like a slow inhale. I pressed a button to switch cameras. Another corridor appeared, empty, but the floor seemed to ripple beneath the light, as if the building itself was breathing. The static returned, climbing and falling, a thin, electric pulse against the hum. And for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a face, pale, expressionless, pressed just beyond the camera's view. I leaned back, trying to blink it away. The smell of dust and cold metal filled my nostrils, sharp against the warmth of the desk lamp. I could feel the chair pressing into my legs, grounding me, but the screens, they kept moving. Corridors I knew were empty showed shadows bending and stretching. Doors opened and closed without sound. The monitors flickered again, then one screen froze. A figure stood there, tall, thin, motionless. The hum of the monitor seemed louder against its stillness, and the pale light caught its face just enough to feel its gaze. I reached for the control pad. Every finger trembled. The screens shifted, corridors twisting like smoke, but the figure remained in that one frame, watching, waiting. The hum of the lights stuttered. A low vibration ran under my chair. Static jumped across the screens, bright white streaks crawling like frost. I could almost hear it breathing. Slow, quiet, patient. The corridors on the monitors seemed alive, stretching, bending, whispering. I pressed buttons rapidly. Switch views. Nothing. Empty hallways. Then one camera, the main reception hall. The reflection in the glass. For a heartbeat, I saw it behind me. The figure from the frozen screen. Its presence leaned closer, stretching across the monitor's frame. I turned in my chair. Nothing. Only the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the stale air around me. I stared at the screens again. Static moved like ripples in water. The corridors warped, and I could feel the space around them shift. The building felt alive, watching, waiting. I rested my palms on the desk. The metal was cold. My breath fogged faintly in the room, and the screens, they flickered, then settled back into pale rectangles, empty, silent, still. But the hum remained, deeper now, like a pulse in the walls, like a reminder of what I had seen. I leaned back in the chair. The static returned in faint bursts, tiny whispers across the monitors. Corridors alive, bending, waiting just beyond the glass. I did not move again, not until the clock ticked past midnight. The fog pressed against the windows. The lights hummed evenly, and somewhere in the distorted halls of the monitors, I felt it watching, always there, just beyond the edge of sight. I shut the laptop lid. The room fell silent. The static vanished. And still, I could feel the corridors breathing, alive and quiet, and the figure waiting, patient, just out of reach. The hallway was colder than I remembered. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, casting pale rectangles across the worn carpet. Even the walls seemed to lean closer tonight, pressing in with quiet weight. I walked slowly, letting each step sink into silence. The soft hum of the building wrapped around me, uneven, almost holding its breath. The air smelled faintly of damp paint and metal, lingering in the corners. Then I saw it, the door at the end of the hall. I had checked it earlier, always locked, but now it was slightly ajar, though it groaned faintly in the stillness, as if sighing after holding its secret too long. I hesitated, fingers brushing the cold metal handle. The chill spread into my palm. A rustling in the walls made me flinch. I pushed gently. The door creaked open wider. Empty, just an office room, stripped of life. Desks, chairs, a thin layer of dust over everything. But the air, it was heavy, charged, like the building had exhaled and left its breath lingering inside. A faint static seemed to hum through the room, vibrating along the floor beneath my shoes. I stepped inside. The carpet pressed into my feet differently here. Soft, but uneven. The hum of the lights grew louder, insistent, almost a voice beneath the static. The smell of dust mixed with something metallic, coppery, like iron left to rust. I looked around. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Yet the shadows felt thick, alive. I reached for the desk. The wood was smooth under my fingers. Cold. The papers were untouched, yet shifted slightly, as if just noticing me. A chair scraped softly behind me. I spun. Empty. The door closed just a fraction. I could feel the air slipping in, colder than the hallway. A faint pressure pressed at the back of my neck, like the room itself was leaning closer, watching. I walked toward the window. The fog outside pressed against the glass, pale and still. The reflection showed only me, but something lingered in the corner, just a shadow bending the light differently. I tried to tell myself it was imagination. It wasn't. The air in the room buzzed faintly, a low vibration under my feet. The hum stretched, deeper, almost impatient. I reached for the door again. It felt warmer than before, like the room was breathing. I didn't pull it closed. I didn't want to leave, though every instinct told me to. Then a subtle shift. The papers on the desk fluttered lightly. A chair moved an inch, without a hand. The shadows stretched longer, leaning toward me. And the hum, it pulsed. Soft, deliberate. I stepped back. The door creaked wider on its own. No wind, no force. Just a slow, patient movement of the building itself. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, textured. The air smelled faintly of ozone now, like electricity lingering after a storm. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity held me. I stepped further inside. The room seemed to respond, shifting subtly under my presence. Shadows bent along the walls. The hum grew faintly louder, vibrating the floor, my chest, my ears. I could feel it. The room wasn't empty. Not completely. It waited in silence. Patient, quietly aware. I stepped toward the center. The air pressed against my skin, heavier with each breath. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling moved along the floor. I could feel it circling, patient, deliberate. I backed toward the door, cold metal handle in hand. The air still thick, charged, almost alive. One last glance. The room seemed still, empty, but the hum lingered, a subtle vibration in the air. The shadows didn't retreat. I closed the door slowly, the handle cold again in my palm. The hallway greeted me back. Pale light, soft carpet, familiar hum, but the memory of the room remained. The pressure, the charge, the silent awareness. I walked on, feet soft against the carpet. The door behind me stayed closed, but the air it left lingered, and I knew it would wait. The office was quiet again, too quiet. The hum of the fluorescent light stretched thin, uneven, pressing against the silence. I sat at the desk, fingers resting on the keyboard. The monitor's pale glow reflected off the glass walls. The fog outside pressed faintly against the windows, soft and motionless. Then I heard it, a voice, low, almost swallowed by the hum. It came from above, the vents, murmuring, twisting through the metal ducts, indecipherable yet urgent, like it was trying to reach me, and yet careful not to be too loud. I froze. The air in the room thickened. My skin prickled. The faint smell of dust mixed with metal drifted down from the ceiling. I leaned back. The voice whispered again. Soft consonants, broken syllables, as though forming sentences that I wasn't meant to understand. My chair creaked as I shifted. Each movement seemed louder than it should be. The light above flickered faintly, casting a pale, uneasy glow across the room. I tried to ignore it, pretended it was just the building settling. But the voice didn't stop. It circled me, curling in the air vents like smoke. I stood slowly, hands brushing over the cold metal of the desk. The carpet fibers pressed into my shoes differently, like the floor itself had noticed me. The voice murmured again, soft, urgent. I moved toward the far wall. The vents hissed slightly with each step. A faint vibration ran along the tiles beneath my feet. The room smelled faintly of ozone now, sharp and metallic under the dust. The voice was closer, not louder but more present. I could feel its insistence in the air, pulling at my attention, curling around my ears. I glanced at the office door. Empty hallway beyond. No one. Yet the voice continued, threading through the metal, slipping beneath the hum of the lights. I leaned against the wall. The vent above me shivered slightly, as if it were breathing. The murmurs traced patterns I couldn't follow, soft syllables curling like smoke in the cold air. I tried to speak. Words caught in my throat. The air pressed against me, heavier, almost living. I could feel it shifting, circling, watching. The hum of the lights stuttered. The voice murmured again, a note of urgency threading through the static. I couldn't understand it, couldn't catch the shape of its meaning, but I knew it wanted me to move, to do something. I stepped back toward the desk. The vent rattled faintly. The whisper followed, curling around the lamp's pale light. My hands brushed the papers, cold and stiff beneath my fingers. A shadow shifted in the corner. Not solid, not fully, just bending the light in a strange way. The voice murmured once more, soft, lingering, and then silence. I waited, breath shallow. The hum steady again, unbroken. The shadow still, almost patient. I exhaled slowly. The air smelled of dust and metal again, the faint hint of ozone fading. The room felt empty, but I could feel it. The memory of the voice pressing, insistent, just out of reach. I pressed my palm to the desk. Cold, grounding. I listened. The vent was still. The murmurs gone. I sat back down, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The fog outside pressed against the glass. The hum of the lights stretched thin, and somewhere above me, in the ducts, I knew the voice was waiting, not moving, not leaving, just patient. I did not speak again. I did not breathe too loudly. The office held a silence, and the whisper instructions lingered in the air, indecipherable, urgent, as though waiting for me to notice. The office felt smaller tonight. The glow from the monitor spilled across the desk, pale and thin. The fog pressed against the windows outside, muffling the distant city hum. I sat back in my chair, the carpet pressed into my shoes. The hum of the fluorescent lights stretched long, uneven, almost breathing. Then I noticed it, a faint glimmer in the corner, 2 points of light, yellow, bright, patient. Eyes. I froze. The air thickened around me. A metallic tang clung faintly to my tongue. The glow did not move, but it shifted when I tried to focus directly. I leaned closer, blinking rapidly. They vanished. Only the corner remained dark, unbroken. I shifted in the chair. The hum of the lights wavered. The carpet felt softer beneath my feet. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp, a trace of something else. Something alive. I looked back. The eyes had returned, faint, glowing at the edge of my vision. I dared not move closer. Not yet. The space felt charged, alive in its quiet. Every instinct whispered that it was watching, waiting. I reached for the desk lamp. Its pale light splashed across the floor. The eyes vanished again, but I could feel them, pressing just beyond the edge of sight, a weight in the shadows. Soft, patient, deliberate. I stood slowly. The chair scraped faintly. Each step stretched the silence. The carpet caught my shoes differently, pulling slightly at each toe. The lights hummed, low and insistent. I glanced toward the corner. The eyes appeared for a heartbeat, then disappeared. I could see the faint shimmer of air, a distortion, like heat rising from a road in summer. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, textured. The air tasted faintly metallic now, like copper lingering after a storm. The eyes reappeared, closer, brighter, and I realized they weren't human. Too still, too precise, watching me without blinking. I tried to look away. The glow lingered at the edge of my vision. The hum of the light seemed louder now, a vibration pressing against the floor, the walls, my chest. I sat back down slowly, hands gripping the edge of the desk. The eyes vanished. The shadows returned to their corners. The room felt empty, yet not empty. I could feel the weight of something in the dark, patiently waiting, always at the periphery. I leaned closer to the monitor. Its pale glow reflected across my face. The fog outside pressed against the glass. The hum stretched long and low. A faint rustling came from the corner. The eyes appeared once more, then vanished. I exhaled slowly. The air smelled of dust and cold metal. The carpet pressed softly beneath my feet. The silence returned. I dare not speak. I dare not breathe too loudly. The eyes lingered in memory, watching even when unseen. I rested my forehead against the desk. The light from the monitor bathed the room in pale rectangles. The hum of the lights steadied. The fog pressed faintly against the windows. And I knew when I looked away, they would return, always there, just beyond the edge of sight. I did not move again. I did not turn. The office held its breath with me. The eyes waited, patient, silent, and I waited too. The hallway was dim tonight. The fluorescent lights hummed low, uneven, casting long, pale rectangles across the carpet. The air smelled faintly of dust and metal, pressing close against the walls. I walked slowly toward the elevator. The soft padding of my shoes against the carpet echoed just enough to feel loud. The hum above seemed to stretch, low and patient. The doors were closed. Cold metal pressed under my fingers as I reached for the button. Then a shiver ran up my arm. The door side open. Empty. The car waited, still and dark. It moved slowly, descending on its own. The cables hummed faintly, deep, almost like a heartbeat beneath the floor. I stepped closer. The air smelled of oil and metal. The pale light from the lobby spilled across the car, inviting, soft, deliberate. I wanted to step back, but my feet moved forward, drawn to the motion, drawn to the emptiness that seemed alive. Inside, the floor vibrated faintly. The walls were pale, smooth metal, reflecting my own hesitant movements. The buttons glowed softly, though I hadn't touched them, and the hum, deeper here, resonant, insistent. I held the railing, cold metal pressed into my palms. The car continued downward, slow, patient, almost deliberate. I glanced at the panel. The floors counted down one by one. Each number seemed to linger longer than it should. A small breeze brushed my cheek, the air moving in gentle pulses, like the building itself breathing. I listened. The hum stretched in long, low waves. The cables groaned faintly, a reminder that something moved unseen beneath the car. The elevator slowed. A soft vibration pressed beneath my feet. The doors below glimmered in pale light, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow lean in from the edge of the shaft. I swallowed. The air smelled sharper now, metallic, faintly coppery. I pressed my back against the wall. The car moved, patient, deliberate, descending into the darkness. I wanted to look away, but curiosity held me. The motion felt hypnotic, like a gentle pull, soft and inescapable. The hum shifted, lower now, almost a whisper in my chest. I could feel the cables above, vibrating faintly in response. The air pressed lightly against my skin, cooler now, as if the car itself had inhaled. I tried to steady my breathing. The faint scent of oil and metal lingered. I could feel the faint draft through the edges of the doors. Soft, deliberate, patient. The floor indicator blinked 1. Then 0. The car slowed. The hum stretched long and low. The doors opened. Empty lobby. No one waiting. Yet the air felt different. Thicker. Charged. I stepped out slowly. The carpet pressed differently beneath my shoes. The hum of the building shifted. The elevator doors behind me remained open for a heartbeat longer than they should. Inviting. I glanced back. The car sat still. Empty. But the feeling lingered. A patient presence. Watching. I walked away. Soft steps. Careful breaths. The hallway stretched pale and quiet. The fog pressed faintly against the windows. The hum faded to its normal, steady pitch. The lobby smelled faintly of metal and dust. But somewhere in the back of my mind, the memory of the descending elevator remained. Slow, deliberate, alive in its silence. I did not look back again. I did not speak. I only walked on and felt the presence waiting, patient, just beyond the edge of light. The storage room smelled of dust and cardboard. The air was thick, almost suffocating, pressed down by the weight of old boxes stacked high. The hum from the fluorescent light above flickered faintly, uneven, casting pale strips across the floor. I stepped inside slowly. My shoes pressed softly against the worn concrete. The air smelled faintly metallic now, like rusted pipes hidden beneath the walls. A box shifted, just a little. The movement was soft, deliberate, almost polite. I froze. The rustling repeated, small, hesitant, like something breathing beneath the stacked crates. Shadows bent along the walls. Corners seemed to thicken, stretching toward me in slow, quiet waves. I pressed my back against the door, cold metal under my palm. The boxes shifted again. Closer this time, pressing against each other. Tiny sound that made my chest tighten. I stepped forward. Fingers brushing against rough cardboard. The scent of old paper and dust rose into my nose, mixed with a faint hint of something alive. The hum of the light overhead stretched low, uneven, almost whispering. A crate toppled slightly. Soft, slow, not enough to make a sound that would travel far, but enough to make me feel the presence. I froze again. The shadows in the corner moved, subtle, patient, like they had waited for me to notice. I took a careful step toward the center of the room. The boxes swayed slightly under their own weight, shifting like breaths under the fluorescent glow. The floor felt cold beneath my shoes. The air pressed against my skin, heavier now, almost living. A rustling came from above, near the ceiling. A box teetered on the edge of the stack. The shadows bent toward it, and I could feel the space itself lean closer. I reached for a crate. Cold, rough under my hands. The air smelled metallic now, faint, sharp like copper in rain. The shadows thickened, pooling in the corners. The hum above stretched thin, almost a whisper I could not place. The rustling moved again. Saw footsteps, perhaps, or the weight of something unseen, circling the edges of the stacks, patient, deliberate. Every instinct told me to leave. Every muscle tensed. But I stayed, trapped by curiosity. I stepped backward. A box shifted just behind me. The movement was slow, deliberate, like the air itself was brushing against the edges of the room. I glanced up. Shadows stretched along the ceiling, long and thin. They shifted when I looked directly, vanishing into the corners. And yet, I could feel them lingering. Patient, waiting. I pressed my palm against the wall. Cold, textured, grounding. The rustling stopped. The air settled. The boxes remained still. But the memory of their movement stayed. Soft, deliberate, almost alive. I could feel the presence in the stillness, leaning just beyond the light. I exhaled slowly. The smell of dust and cardboard pressed lightly against my nose. The floor was cold beneath my shoes. The fluorescent light hummed steadily again. I did not move. I did not breathe too loudly. The shadows remained patient in their corners, waiting for me to leave. I stepped toward the door, fingers brushing cold metal. The boxes did not shift again. The shadows remained still. The storage room was empty. And yet, I could feel it. The presence, patient, deliberate, pressing quietly against the edges of the room, just beyond sight. I walked out slowly. Soft footsteps, careful breath. The hum of the hallway welcomed me back. The storage room remained behind, alive in its silence, waiting for the next curious soul. The office felt colder tonight. The hum of the fluorescent lights stretched uneven, thin and low. The fog pressed against the windows outside, soft and unbroken, like it had been waiting. I walked slowly toward the main window. The carpet pressed gently under my shoes. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold metal, lingering near the edges of the room. Then I saw it, a handprint, pale, smudged against the frosted glass. I froze. The cold pressed through the glass into my fingertips. A faint metallic scent lingered, sharp, almost coppery. The edges of the print shimmered slightly in the pale light. I reached closer. The handprint seemed to move, shifting imperceptibly. Fingers curling faintly, just out of reach, as though it was trying to touch me before I touched it. I pressed my palm against the glass. The print vanished instantly. The air seemed to shiver in its absence, like the room had exhaled in quiet disappointment. I leaned back. The carpet beneath my feet felt uneven. The hum of the lights stretched long and low. The air smelled faintly of frost and something else, something alive, patient, watching. Then it appeared again. Same shape, same pale fingers pressed flat against the glass. I blinked. It vanished. I stepped closer. The fog outside blurred the city lights into soft, pale streaks. The air pressed lightly against my skin. My breath fogged faintly near the window, small clouds against the cold glass. I touched the glass again. Nothing, but I could feel it. The imprint had left a weight in the air, a subtle pressure at my fingertips. The handprint appeared a third time, closer to the corner of the window. Fingers stretched wide, pale, delicate. I didn't move. The hum of the lights wavered faintly, low and insistent. I pressed my face close to the glass. The fog outside softened the city, but the handprint stayed sharp and still. I could see faint ridges, almost like veins beneath the pale skin. The air smelled metallic again, faint and sharp. My fingers tingled against the cold window. I reached out slowly. The handprint disappeared. A subtle shiver ran down my arm. The air seemed to thicken, charged now with quiet weight. I stepped back. The lights hummed evenly again. The fog pressed against the window. But the memory of the handprint lingered, like a pulse in the air, patient, deliberate. I pressed my palm to the glass. Cold, grounding. Nothing appeared. The air smelled faintly of frost and metal. The room felt empty, yet I could feel it. The handprint's presence lingered in the corner of my mind, like a shadow folded into the air itself. Patient, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The carpet pressed gently beneath my feet. The hum of the fluorescent lights stretched soft and low. The fog outside pressed faintly against the glass. I did not touch the window again. I did not move too quickly. I only watched the pale handprint in memory, knowing it could return at any moment. I stepped away. Soft steps, careful breath. The office held its silence with me. The light pressed faintly against the walls. The air remained heavy, charged, and somewhere beyond the glass, I knew the handprint waited. Patient, silent, unreachable. The office was too quiet tonight. The hum of the ventilation stretched low, uneven, pressing against the still air. Outside, fog curled softly around the building, smearing the city lights into pale, ghostly streaks. I walked slowly across the carpet. Soft footsteps, careful breaths. The floor felt cooler than usual, pressing gently into my shoes. Then the lights pulsed, flickered, a long, uneven pause before they glowed again, pale and strained. Shadows bent across the floor, unnatural angles stretching across the carpet, across the walls. They shifted when I moved, just slightly, like the building itself was breathing in slow, shallow gasps. I stopped. The hum of the lights wavered. A faint metallic scent lingered in the air. The carpet pressed softly beneath my feet. Another flicker, longer this time. The shadows danced, stretching along the desks and chairs. Corners bent inward. The pale glow from the monitors cast uneven shapes across the walls. I held my breath. The air pressed against my skin, faintly cold, faintly alive. A soft rustling came from behind a desk. I turned, slow, deliberate. Nothing, only the shadows, only the hum of the lights, stretching thin and low. The lights pulsed again, longer now. The shadows grew thick along the walls. They seemed to lean toward me, patient, deliberate. I stepped closer to the center of the room. The carpet pressed, uneven beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly metallic now, sharp, lingering in the corners. I could feel the subtle vibration through the floor, a resonance that stretched into my chest and fingers. The lights stuttered again, a soft, uneven pulse. The shadows bent, stretching long and thin across the carpet. They shifted when I focused on them directly, vanishing into corners, leaving nothing but a lingering presence. I pressed my palm to the desk. Cold, smooth, grounding. The hum of the ventilation continued, low and persistent. The air smelled faintly of dust, metallic and sharp. I dared not move quickly. I dared not breathe too loudly. The shadows seemed to watch, patient, deliberate. The lights pulsed again, stretching, flickering, casting pale rectangles across the floor. A chair scraped softly behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing moved. The shadows remained, leaning into the light, bending slightly, alive in their stillness. I exhaled. The carpet pressed softly beneath my shoes. The lights hummed low and uneven. The air seemed heavier now, alive in its quiet weight. Another flicker. The shadows stretched long across the walls, leaning, patient, deliberate. The hum shifted, almost imperceptibly, threading to the floor, the walls, my chest. I stepped back toward the door. The lights pulsed gently above. Shadows bent and leaned, following me just out of reach. The air smelled faintly of ozone, metallic, lingering. I did not look at the lights directly again. I did not speak. I moved slowly, softly, letting the carpet press gently beneath my shoes. The office held its quiet with me. The shadows remained patient in their corners. The lights continued their pulsing, flickering rhythm, casting long, uneven rectangles across the floor. I exhaled slowly. The air pressed lightly against my skin. The hum stretched low and thin. The fog outside pressed softly against the windows. I left the room. Soft steps, careful breaths. The lights flickered one last time behind me, casting shadows that lingered even after I passed. And somewhere in that stillness, I felt the presence of the room, patient, deliberate, alive in its flickering silence. The office smelled colder tonight. Fog pressed faintly against the windows, soft and unbroken, diffusing the distant city lights into pale streaks. The hum of the fluorescent lights stretched low, uneven, brushing against the walls like breath. I was alone. The carpet pressed gently beneath my shoes. Every movement sounded louder than it should, soft footsteps echoing faintly, pressed into the quiet. Then I heard it, my name, soft, almost a whisper, impossible to place, close yet far, like it traveled to the walls themselves. I froze. The air pressed against my skin. A metallic tang lingered faintly, sharp, in the corners of the room. The hum of the lights seemed to stretch longer, low and patient. Axa, I did not respond. The voice came again, just as soft, folded into silence, sliding through the cracks between walls and carpet. I turned slowly. Nothing moved. Shadows bent faintly along the edges of the room, stretching long and thin across the floor. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold metal. Another whisper. Closer now. Impossible, yet undeniably near, curling around the edges of my ears. Soft, deliberate, patient. I pressed my palm to the desk. Cold, grounding. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The hum of the light stretched thin and low, threading through the floor, the walls, my chest. Axa, the voice seemed to linger in one corner, then another, like it was moving with the shadows themselves. The air grew thicker. A faint metallic scent pressed softly against my nose. I stepped backward. The shadows shifted. Corners bent toward me faintly, almost alive. The lights hummed unevenly above. The room felt charged. The voice came again. Patient, impossible to pinpoint. Faint, insistent. I exhaled slowly. The carpet pressed softly beneath my shoes. The hum of the lights steadied. The fog pressed gently against the windows. I pressed my face close to the window. Outside, the city stretched pale and distant. Inside, the air seemed heavier, almost breathing around me. The name whispered again, curling into the quiet, threading around my senses like smoke. I tried to move toward the door. Soft steps, careful breaths. The voice followed, faint, layered into the corners, impossible to escape. I stopped. The air pressed against my skin, cool, metallic. The shadows leaned lightly against the walls. The hum stretched long and low. The voice whispered once more, so close I could feel it brush the edges of my mind, so far that it seemed to come from the air itself, folded into the silence of the room. I dared not respond. I dared not speak. Every instinct told me to run, but something held me in place, soft, patient, deliberate. I pressed my hands lightly against the window. Cold, smooth, grounding. The carpet beneath my shoes pressed softly. The hum of the light stretched low, steady again. The fog outside pressed faintly against the glass. And still the voice lingered. Faint, impossible to locate, patient, deliberate, threaded into the quiet of the room. I stepped back slowly. Soft footsteps, careful breath. The shadows leaned, long and thin, stretching into corners, waiting. The air pressed lightly against my skin. The hum stretched thin and low. The name whispered once more, folding into the silence, patient, impossible, always just beyond reach. I left the room. Soft steps, careful breath. The lights pulsed gently behind me. The shadows held their corners. And the voice, low, soft, patient, followed in memory, lingering, impossible to escape, folded into the quiet. The hallway smelled faintly of stale coffee. The carpet pressed soft beneath my shoes, but the air was heavier tonight. Fog curled around the windows, smearing the distant city lights into pale, restless streaks. I stepped into the break room slowly. The door creaked softly behind me. The air smelled colder here, metallic, pressed against my skin. The room was empty, and yet shadows pooled in the corners, thick and patient, bending in directions they should not. The fluorescent light overhead hummed low, uneven. Pale rectangles stretched across the linoleum floor. The shadows did not follow the light. They lingered, almost alive, pressing quietly against the walls. I moved closer to the counter, fingers brushing the cold metal. The coffee machine sat silent, dark, its surface reflecting the pale light in fragments. The shadows shifted slightly in response, stretching, folding inward, patient and deliberate. A chill pressed along my spine. I could feel it in my shoulders, in the slight brush of the air against my skin. The shadows pulled deeper in the corners, folding into each other, weightless yet heavy, almost breathing. I stepped toward the table. The linoleum pressed cold beneath my shoes. The hum of the light stretched long and low. I could smell the faint, sharp tang of metal in the air. A shadow moved, just a fraction, too subtle to be certain, but enough to make the air thicken. I stopped. The corners held darkness that did not belong, leaning slightly toward me. The hum of the light faltered, stretched uneven. My breath fogged faintly near the ceiling. Another movement, slow, patient, almost deliberate. The shadows pressed along the edges of the room, gathering near the sink, pooling behind the chairs. I pressed my hand against the counter, cold, grounding. The shadows paused, patient, deliberate, as though waiting for me to notice them fully. I exhaled slowly. The carpet pressed soft under my shoes. The air smelled faintly of coffee and metal. The hum stretched thin and low. The fog pressed faintly against the windows, soft and unbroken. I tried to focus on the light above, but the shadows seemed to ignore it, leaning, bending, almost alive in their stillness. They held the corners, patient, deliberate. A chair scraped softly behind me. I turned slowly. Nothing, only the shadows, pooling, pressing gently against the edges of the room. The cold pressed against my fingers. I could feel the air vibrate faintly around me. A subtle metallic scent lingered near the counter, threaded into the quiet of the room. I stepped backward, careful, soft steps, careful breath. The shadows did not follow, but they leaned slightly closer, patient and deliberate. The hum of the light stretched long and low, and the room pressed quietly against me, alive in its stillness. I pressed my hand against the doorframe, cold metal grounding me. The shadows lingered, pooling, bending, almost conscious in the corners, patient, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The break room remained silent, cold, weighted with something unseen. The hum stretched thin and low. The fog pressed gently against the windows. I walked out slowly. Soft steps, careful breaths. The door creaked faintly behind me. The shadows remained, patient in their corners, folded into the edges of the room, alive in the quiet, waiting for the next presence to enter. The air smelled metallic as I left. The hum of the light faded behind me. The break room stayed colder, darker, its shadows patient, deliberate, holding their silence. The night pressed heavy against the windows. Fog curled softly around the building, smearing the distant lights into pale, restless streaks. The office carpet felt slightly damp beneath my shoes. I moved slowly down the hall. Soft, careful footsteps. The air smelled faintly metallic, pressed against my skin. Then I heard it, a thump, heavy, from above, echoing through the empty floors like the building itself was breathing. I froze. The hum of the fluorescent light stretched low, uneven, pressing against the walls. A chill pressed along my shoulders, crawling down my spine. Another thump, closer, then a slow, deliberate shuffle, soft but insistent. I tried to ignore it, focus on the faint hum, the press of the carpet beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold metal, sharp in the corners. The footsteps repeated, heavy, echoing, impossible place. They moved above me, across empty floors, then paused, lingering as though waiting. I stepped toward the staircase. The air pressed against my skin. A faint metallic scent lingered, sharp and thin. The hum of the lights wavered slightly, stretched thin. Another footfall, slow, patient. The echo carried faintly down the stairwell, folding into the quiet like a pulse. I reached the base of the stairs. Cold metal under my fingers, grounding me. The carpet pressed softly beneath my shoes. The footsteps paused. The air felt charged, heavy, patient. I stepped up slowly. Soft, careful steps. Each movement pressed into the stillness, and the echoes answered me, folding down the stairwell like distant breath. A shadow stretched along the wall, long, thin, bending just slightly at impossible angles. The air smelled metallic, faint, lingering. The hum of the fluorescent lights continued, low, insistent. The footsteps began again, deliberate, heavy, echoing across empty floors. Closer now, yet impossible to locate. I pressed my hand against the railing, cold, solid, grounding. I stopped. The air seemed thicker now, a subtle vibration pressing along my skin, threaded into my chest and fingers. Another shuffle, then silence. The echo lingered faintly, folded into the air like smoke. I stepped forward again. Soft steps, careful breath. The shadow leaned along the wall, patient, deliberate. The air smelled faintly of frost and metal. The footsteps resumed, then paused again, then moved lightly, almost imperceptibly, across the empty upper floor. Impossible to predict, impossible to locate. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, grounding. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The hum stretched thin and low. The air felt alive around me. I exhaled slowly. The stairwell pressed quiet and heavy. The footsteps moved again, soft and deliberate, echoing across the upper floors, folded into shadows, into the hum, into the air itself. I dared not look up. I dared not speak. I only moved slowly, softly, letting the carpet press gently beneath my shoes. The footsteps paused. The air pressed against my skin, cold and metallic. The shadows leaned faintly along the walls. The hum of the light stretched low and steady. Then they moved again, soft, deliberate, echoing, patient, impossible. I stepped back down the staircase. Careful, soft steps. The echoes followed faintly, distant but insistent. The shadows held corners. The air pressed heavy, alive in its quiet weight. I left the stairwell. Soft steps, careful breath. The hum of the fluorescent lights continued, low and uneven. The fog pressed faintly against the windows. And somewhere above me, the footsteps lingered, heavy, patient, folded into the quiet, impossible to escape. The office smelled faintly of dust and coal metal. Fog pressed softly against the windows, diffusing the distant city lights into pale, trembling streaks. The carpet beneath my shoes was damp, pressing lightly into the soles. I passed the supply closet. The fluorescent lights hummed unevenly above. The shadows leaned slightly along the walls, long, patient, almost deliberate. Then I saw it. The mirror, small, square, unremarkable at first glance. But as I moved closer, the reflection settled into something wrong. The room looked as it should. Desk, chair, scattered papers. The hum of the light stretched low and uneven. The fog pressed faintly against the windows. And behind me the figure, tall, thin, grinning faintly, eyes pale in the reflection, unblinking, impossible. I froze. The air pressed gently against my skin. A metallic tang lingered faintly in the corners. The carpet beneath my shoes felt suddenly sharp, uneven. I stepped closer. The figure did not move. The grin stretched slightly wider. Impossible, deliberate, patient. I turned slowly. Nothing. Only the room as it should be. Only the hum of the lights low and steady. Only the faint fog pressing against the glass. The mirror lied. Or perhaps it showed a truth I could not face. I pressed my hand against the desk. Cold, grounding. The carpet pressed soft beneath my shoes. The shadows leaned faintly, patient, deliberate. I dared not blink. The figure remained, grinning, patient, impossible to reach. I exhaled slowly. The air pressed heavier against my skin. A faint metallic scent lingered near the mirror. The hum of the light stretched long and low. I stepped back. Soft, careful steps. The reflection did not change. The figure's grin held, unwavering, folded into the quiet of the room. I tried to focus on the light above, on the carpet beneath my shoes. The hum, steady, low, grounding. The air smelled faintly of frost and metal. The figure remained behind me. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, solid. The reflection stayed. Patient, deliberate. I reached slowly toward the mirror. The air pressed soft against my fingers. The hum of the light stretched long and low. The metallic tang lingered faintly. The grin held, impossible, unwavering. I exhaled slowly. The shadows leaned in the corners, patient. The carpet pressed beneath my shoes. The hum pulsed faintly, threading into the air. I stepped back, careful, soft. The reflection remained. The figure grinned. Patient, impossible, deliberate. I turned fully. Nothing. The room as it should be. The air pressed cool against my skin. The fog outside pressed faintly against the glass. I looked again. The mirror showed the same room. And the figure behind me, grinning faintly, patient, deliberate, impossible. I pressed my hand lightly against the mirror. Cold, smooth, grounding. The reflection did not change. The grin remained. Impossible. I stepped away. Soft steps, careful breath. The hum stretched long and low. The shadows leaned in corners. The mirror remained. The room looked right. And behind me, always, the figure grinned. Patient, deliberate, impossible to reach. The air pressed soft against my skin. The hum pulsed low. The carpet pressed beneath my shoes. And the reflection held its secret, folded into the quiet of the office, waiting for the next glance, the next moment of breath, the next intrusion into its stillness. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and cold metal. Fog pressed softly against the windows, blurring the distant lights into pale, trembling streaks. The carpet beneath my shoes felt damp, pressing lightly into the soles. I reached the elevator. The doors were closed. Silent, too silent. Then they slid open, slowly, revealing the hallway, but not quite the same. The carpet seemed darker, pressed unevenly beneath the faint light. Shadows leaned just slightly differently along the walls. The hum of the fluorescent lights was stretched thin, wavering, almost expectant. I stepped inside. The air smelled metallic, sharp, pressing gently against my skin. The floor hummed faintly under my shoes, subtle and unsteady. The hallway outside stretched slightly longer than I remembered. The doors of the far end were slightly ajar. A pale, thin fog pressed against the glass, curling along the edges of the walls. I stepped forward. Soft, careful steps. The carpet pressed unevenly beneath my soles. The hum of the light stretched long and low. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold metal. A subtle shift. A shadow moved along the far wall. Too deliberate. Almost conscious. I froze. The elevator doors slid closed behind me, pressing silence against the corridor I had just entered. The hum lingered low, patient. The air pressed against my skin, heavy, metallic, impossible to ignore. I moved again. Soft, careful steps. The fog pressed faintly along the edges of the walls. The shadows pulled slightly differently than before, patient, deliberate, waiting. Another shift. A door along the hallway leaned just slightly open, though I was certain it had been closed moments ago. The light pressed in across the floor, casting long, unnatural angles. I stepped closer. The carpet pressed soft beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and thin. The hum of the lights stretched low and uneven. I paused. The hallway stretched longer, emptier, colder. Shadows leaned in corners where there should have been light. The air pressed gently against my skin, threaded into the quiet, almost alive. I tried to focus on the distant end of the hall. The doors were ajar now, inviting, impossible. The fog curled faintly, soft and pale against the walls. The hum stretched thin, insistent. I stepped forward again. Soft, careful steps. The shadows shifted slightly, folding into each other. The air smelled faintly of frost and metal. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. A subtle sound, too soft to place. A shuffle, a shift, a weight against the air. I stopped. The hum of the lights continued, low and uneven. The hallway seemed longer now, more patient, deliberate. I pressed my hand against the wall. Cold, solid, grounding. The shadows leaned faintly, bending in directions they shouldn't. The fog curled along the edges, almost alive in its quiet weight. I stepped again. The carpet pressed beneath my soles. The hum stretched low, threading into the air. The shadows pulled differently than before, patient, deliberate, impossible to predict. I reached the far doors. They pressed against the hallway, slightly ajar. The fog curled thin along the edges. The air pressed cool and metallic against my skin. The light above hummed low and steady. I exhaled slowly. The hallway stretched faintly, subtly wrong. The shadows leaned in corners, patient. The air pressed against my skin, alive in its quiet weight. The elevator behind me waited, silent and still. I stepped toward the open doors. Soft, careful steps. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my soles. The hum of the light stretched thin, insistent. And then the doors closed behind me. Slowly, quietly, the hallway remained, subtly altered, folded into the silence, alive in its patient, deliberate wrongness. The fog curled faintly along the walls. The shadows leaned, waiting. The hum of the lights pulsed low, insistent. And the hallway pressed soft and cold against my skin, impossible to leave entirely behind. The night pressed close against the glass. Fog curled faintly along the edges, thin and pale. The office smelled of dust and cold metal, lingering beneath the hum of lights. I noticed the window first. A soft, irregular tapping. Light, deliberate, echoing faintly through the still air. I approached slowly. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp, pressing gently against my skin. The fog outside shifted unnaturally. Curling in ways that shouldn't have been possible, I pressed my palm lightly against the glass. Cold, smooth, grounding. The tapping stopped. A pause, almost like breath. I exhaled slowly. The hum of the fluorescent lights stretched low and thin. The shadows leaned in the corners, patient, deliberate. The fog pressed against the glass once more, curling, shifting with faint intent. And then the tapping resumed, soft, irregular, echoing faintly through the office. Each tap pressed against the air, faintly metallic. Impossible to ignore. I stepped back. The carpet beneath my feet pressed soft and uneven. The hum stretched low. The fog outside curled tighter, thin and pale, pressing against the window. I listened. There was a rhythm now, deliberate, patient. Each tap threaded into the quiet, folding into the air like a faint, impossible whisper. I moved closer again. The air pressed gently against my skin, cool, metallic. The fog shifted with subtle intent. The tapping continued, patient, deliberate. I pressed my palm to the glass once more. Cold, solid, grounding. The tapping ceased. A silence folded over the office. Thick, impossible to shake. I exhaled slowly. The shadows in the corners leaned faintly, stretching just slightly longer than the light allowed. The hum pulsed low and steady, threading into the air. Then a single tap returned, soft, near, echoing faintly across the metal of the window frame. The fog pressed closer, curling thin and pale along the edges. I stepped back. The carpet beneath my shoes pressed uneven, damp. The air smelled faintly of frost and metal. The hum stretched thin, low and insistent. I exhaled again. The window seemed impossibly far away and impossibly close at once. The fog shifted subtly, curling in waves that pressed against the edges of the glass. Alive, patient. The tapping continued. I leaned closer. The air pressed soft against my face, metallic, sharp. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The hum of the light stretched long and low. The shadows pulled faintly in corners, patient, deliberate. I reached out slowly, fingertips brushing the glass. Cold, smooth, impossible to grasp. The tapping stopped. A single pause. A breath folded into the silence. Then tapping resumed. Closer, deliberate, echoing faintly, threading into quiet. I stepped back. The carpet pressed beneath my soles. The hum stretched low, insistent. The fog pressed tight against the glass, curling, folding into itself. I watched the faint shadows shift outside the window. Impossible angles, patient and deliberate. The air smelled faintly metallic, pressing against my skin. The tapping persisted, irregular, deliberate, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The room pressed quiet and cold around me. The carpet beneath my feet felt damp, pressing soft into the soles. The shadows pulled in corners, leaning, patient. I pressed my palm against the glass again. Cold, grounding. The tapping ceased. The fog shifted faintly, curling, folding against the edges of the window. And then, from somewhere just beyond the glass, a soft, deliberate breath pressed into the night. The tapping returned, faint and irregular. The fog pressed closer, impossible to ignore. The shadows in the office leaned, patient, deliberate, folded into the quiet, alive in the waiting. I stepped back one last time. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The hum stretched low and insistent. The tapping continued, impossibly patient, threaded into the stillness of night, pressing soft against the window, impossible to leave entirely behind. The office smelled faintly of paper and cold metal. The hum of the light stretched low, thin, almost imperceptible. Outside, fog curled faintly against the window, shifting in slow, unnatural patterns. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The silence pressed soft against my ears, until the whisper began. A voice, low, almost breath-like, curling along the walls. Numbers, soft, slow, deliberate. 1. I froze. The carpet pressed uneven beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the skin. Shadows pulled in the corners, patient and patient. 2. Closer now, impossible to place. Somewhere behind, somewhere ahead, every direction at once. I breathed slowly. The fog pressed against the window, thin and curling, alive with intent. The hum of the light stretched low, insistent. 3. I shifted. The floor pressed soft beneath my feet. Cold metal of the window frame touched my fingers. The whisper threaded along the edges of the room. 4. The numbers lingered, soft, patient, echoing faintly through the air, folding into the stillness. I felt the space expand and contract, the silence stretching low, almost breathing. 5. The air pressed gently against my skin. The hum of the lights threaded low, insistent. Shadows stretched long in corners, bending faintly toward me. The fog outside pressed in and pale against the glass. 6. Closer now, impossible to place. Every corner, every wall, every breath. My chest rose slowly, unevenly. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp. 7. The whisper pressed soft, deliberate, threading into the quiet, into the low hum, into the uneven carpet beneath my shoes. It lingered in the corners, patient, watching. 8. I pressed my palms lightly against the desk. Cold, smooth, grounding. The numbers circled me, impossible to pinpoint. The fog curled faintly outside, pressing against the window. 9. The silence stretched low. The hum of the lights pulsed faintly. Shadows leaned long, patient. The air smelled of frost and metal, pressing soft against my skin. 10. A pause. Impossible. The whisper lingered, folding into the stillness. And then it began again. Soft, deliberate, threading through the quiet. 1. I exhaled slowly. The carpet pressed soft beneath my feet. The air hummed low, metallic. The fog outside shifted faintly, curling and folding along the window edges. 2. Closer now, still impossible to place. Everywhere at once. The numbers pressed into the room, threading along the walls, the shadows, the corners. 3. The hum of the light stretched low, insistent. The shadows leaned long. The air pressed soft against my skin, cold, metallic. The whisper pressed deliberate, patient. 4. I pressed my palm to the window. Cold, smooth, grounding. The fog curled outside, shifting impossibly alive. The numbers lingered, threading through the room, impossible to shake. 5. The silence pressed around me. The hum pulsed faintly, low and steady. The shadows pulled in corners, patient, deliberate. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp. 6. Impossible to place. Everywhere at once. Threaded through the low hum, through the uneven carpet beneath my feet. The whisper pressed patient, deliberate. 7. The fog pressed tight against the window. Cold, thin. The numbers threaded along the air, curling faintly with intent. 8! I exhaled slowly. The shadows leaned faintly, stretching. The hum threaded low. The air pressed metallic against my skin. 9. Closer now. Impossible to pinpoint. The whisper wound itself through the quiet, through the shadows, through the carpet beneath my shoes. 10. A pause. Faint. Impossible to catch. The air hung heavy, metallic. The fog pressed tight against the glass. The shadows leaned patient, deliberate. The numbers began again, soft, threading through the stillness. Impossible to place, impossible to ignore. I stood, frozen, pressed soft against the air, each whisper folding into the room, threading to the hum, the shadows, the cold, the fog. And I could do nothing but breathe, slowly, patiently, waiting. The count continued. The hallway stretched long and pale. The fluorescent lights hummed low above me, flickering faintly, uneven. The carpet pressed soft beneath my shoes, thin and worn. I thought I knew the way. I had walked it countless times. But now, something shifted. The walls leaned faintly, impossibly. A corner, I remembered straight, now bent ever so slightly. Shadows pulled along the edges, stretching thin and patient. I stepped forward. The floor pressed uneven beneath me. Cold air brushed my arms, thin and sharp. A faint smell of dust and old metal lingered in the bend of the hallway. I paused, turned my head. The hallway stretched longer than memory allowed. Every turn seemed wrong, yet familiar. A soft, rustling press along the walls, impossible to place. Every shadow seemed to curve toward me, bending with intent. The hum of the lights pressed low against my chest. I moved again. The bend of the hallway shifted. Where I expected straight, the walls arched, impossibly smooth, as if guiding me deeper, drawing me in. The pale light pulled along the floor. Shadows stretched, leaning. The carpet pressed uneven. A draft slipped along my collar, sharp and cold. I felt the space contract, then stretch, like the hallway was breathing, patient and deliberate. I stopped, turned my head. The corridor behind me had changed. A door that always led to storage now curved, receding into shadow. The air pressed faintly metallic. I shivered, even though the temperature had not changed. Footsteps soft, too soft, deliberate, or perhaps only imagined. The carpet pressed beneath my shoes, grounding, yet every step echoed longer than it should. I reached for the wall, cold, smooth, solid. My fingertips traced the wallpaper, thin, textured, but the wall seemed to lean slightly away, bending, almost imperceptibly as I followed its edge. I turned a corner. The hallway stretched impossibly long. Shadows bent along the edges, folding over themselves. The lights hummed low, flickering faintly, almost patient. I slowed, breath shallow. The smell of old metal and faint dust pressed against my nose. I traced the walls with my hands, trying to anchor myself in something solid. But the hallway was wrong. Subtle, slow. Every straight line I remembered bent, folded back upon itself. I could not trust my eyes, could not trust the familiar shapes. I stopped again. The hum of the lights pressed low. The shadows leaned closer, patient. I pressed my back lightly against the wall. Cold, smooth, grounding. I turned my head. The far end seemed closer, then farther, then closer again, impossible to judge. The walls curved faintly, bending with intent. A soft draft pressed along the floor, rustling the edges of the carpet. I tried to breathe evenly. The corridor seemed to pulse, alive, patient, waiting. Each step I took stretched the space, as if the hallway itself had a rhythm, slow and deliberate. I moved again. The floor pressed soft. The walls leaned faintly. Shadows bent along the edges. The hum of the lights pressed against my chest. A draft brushed my arms, cold and sharp. I paused, turned my head. The hallway had shifted again. The bend I had passed now curved impossibly back toward me. Impossible angles pressed against my mind. The hallway seemed to stretch forever. Every corner, every turn, impossible to trust. The pale light, the shadows, the draft, the hum, all patient, deliberate, aware. I reached the end, or what I thought was the end. The wall leaned slightly inward, Shadows pulled, patient, waiting. I pressed a hand to the wall. Cold, smooth, solid, and I realized I had walked these steps before, yet had never reached the end. The hallway twisted again, pulling me forward, deeper into its impossible length. I exhaled slowly. The carpet pressed soft beneath my shoes. The pale light stretched low. Shadows pulled, patient. The hum of the lights threaded low. I moved, step by step, alone, lost. The hallway twisted again. The room was silent, dark, soft, and still. Moonlight spilled in across the floor, pale and brittle. I lay on my back, chest heavy, eyes wide. The air smelled faintly of dust and old linen. A hum of distant traffic, muffled, pressed against the walls. I couldn't move, not a finger, not an eyelid. The paralysis wrapped slow, patient, around my limbs, breath shallow. The blankets pressed uneven, warm and soft. And then I felt it, a brush against my shoulder. Cold, sharp, the kind of cold that seeps into bones. Not wind, not draft, something deliberate. I tried to turn, tried to lift an arm. The paralysis held firm. Soft, patient, relentless. The moonlight shifted across the room. Shadows pulled low along the edges of the furniture. A faint rustling pressed against the closet door. I tried to blink. My eyes felt glued open. The cold hand lingered. Fingers light, impossibly thin, tracing along my shoulder, down my arm. A whisper of touch, yet heavy, heavy with presence. I could feel the weight of it on my skin. Every nerve sharpened, alive, waiting. The blankets pressed uneven beneath me, grounding. But it did not matter. The cold was aware. I swallowed dry. The air pressed against my chest, tight and thin. Every shadow seemed to bend closer, leaning into the moonlight, patient. A faint hum threaded along the edges of the room. Or maybe I imagined it. Every sound amplified. Distant traffic, the hum of lights, the rustle of the curtains. Everything sharp, alive. The hand moved slowly, deliberate, across my collarbone, tracing the ridge of muscle. Cold, cold. I felt the chill seep through layers of blankets, through bone, through muscle, into the marrow. I tried to speak. A whisper stuck in my throat. The air pressed heavy, thick, impossible to force breath against. The room shifted. Shadows pulled thicker, deeper. The hum of the house pressed low. I could feel a draft, though the window was closed. A scent, faint, metallic, pressed along the edges of the cold. The hand lingered, hovering, patient, then retreating slowly, back along my shoulder, upward, toward the head of the bed. A light brush like smoke. I shivered. Goose flesh rippled across my arms and neck. The blankets clung damp to my skin. The stillness pressed thick, as if the room itself waited. The paralysis loosened slightly. My fingers tingled, edges of movement returning. The moonlight felt thinner, brittle. The shadows pulled low, silent. The hum of the house pressed lower, patient, fading. I sat up slowly, air cold against my skin. The room seemed empty, yet heavy, aware. I ran my hands along my shoulders. No mark, no handprint, only the chill lingering deep in my bones. Only the memory of the brush, impossible to forget. I stepped to the window. Frosted glass pressed cold against my fingertips. Outside, fog drifted thin across the parking lot. Silent, patient, watching. I sat back down, wrapped the blankets tighter. The cold still lingered in the air, faint, deliberate. A memory pressed soft against my spine. I exhaled slowly. The room pressed low, shadows pooling. The hum of the house threaded low. Alone, awake, and waiting. I touched my shoulder. Cold, only a memory now. The hand was gone, but the weight remained. The night stretched long, thick, patient, and I lay still, listening, breathing, feeling the chill echo softly along my bones. Step by step, breath by breath. Alone, the room held its silence, and I waited. The office was quiet. Late night, fluorescent lights hummed low above, pulsing soft and uneven. I walked in, shoes echoing faint on the linoleum floor. The air smelled faintly of paper and printer ink, old coffee lingering in corners. A draft brushed my neck, thin, fleeting. The desk caught my eye immediately. Objects shifted, almost imperceptibly on their own. Pens rolled. Paper slid in soft, precise lines. I froze. The movement wasn't random. It was deliberate, like someone arranging them. A stapler tipped slightly, balanced on the edge. A notebook slid closer, as if drawn by unseen hands. A faint creak whispered along the shelves. I stepped closer, careful. The air felt heavier near the desk. Cold, almost damp, pressing against my skin. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, ragged. The papers began to form shapes. Rectangles stacking into angles that didn't quite make sense. Pens aligned in strange, deliberate patterns. Something organic in the arrangement. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. A soft rustling pressed from inside a drawer. I opened it slowly, fingertips brushing cold metal. Empty. Nothing moved. Yet the desk, still alive. I knelt slightly. The edges of papers lifted in a breeze I could not feel. Shadows stretched long along the desk surface. Shapes seemed to pulse, shifting when I blinked. A coffee mug rolled forward, stopping at the edge, tilted precariously. Its handle pointed toward me, like a warning. I swallowed dry. The hum of the lights pressed low, almost a whisper. I reached toward the papers. A pen jumped lightly against my finger, as if aware of touch. The shapes on the desk, they were forming letters, not words, not sentences, just symbols, sharp angles and curves, impossible to read yet familiar somehow. The air tightened, pressing around my shoulders, chest. I could feel the room breathing, faint, shallow. The hum of the lights pulsed with it, matching. I stepped back slowly. The pen slid across the desk again. Another symbol etched itself across the top sheet. Cold, deliberate. The edges of the desk seemed darker, longer, shadows pooling in corners that hadn't been there before. I could hear soft footsteps behind me. Or was it my own? A quiet tap, 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 echoing faint on the floor. I turned. Nothing. Yet the desk still moved. A paper lifted softly, suspended midair, trembling. I reached, and it dropped instantly. Edges frayed like smoke, curling into shapes I couldn't name. The pen rolled toward me, stopped at my toes. The desk hummed faintly with movement, alive, aware. I leaned closer. The shapes became more deliberate. Not letters, not numbers, just intention. Something waiting, patient, under the hum of fluorescent lights. I could smell something faint now, metallic. Ink, yes, but something else, like cold metal, wet, pressed against the air. The room seemed smaller, walls bending slightly, shadows deepening. I stepped back, the desk tilted, a subtle lean, like a creature watching me. The symbols shifted slightly, almost breathing. My skin prickled, every nerve alive, tense. The lights flickered, low, then steady. The shadows thinned, edges sharp again. The desk still held its shapes, rigid now. The air pressed cold against my face. I swallowed. A soft hum lingered in the room, low and patient. The papers, the pens, the mug, motionless. Yet I knew. The desk was aware, waiting. I stepped away, heart loud, legs stiff. The office seemed empty again, but the hum of the desk lingered. The shapes remained, subtle, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I turned toward the door. Fingers tingled from the cold touch of air. The room held its silence, thick and patient. I didn't look back. Outside, the hall stretched quiet and dim. I could feel the desk's presence lingering behind me. Soft, waiting, aware. I exhaled slowly. The hum followed, faint under my skin. I left the office. Lights dimmed behind me. Shadows pooled where they shouldn't. The desk waited, and I knew it would move again. The night pressed cold against the window. Fog drifted low, curling around the building like it had a will of its own. I sat before the monitors, small hums and static filling the otherwise empty room. The screens flickered softly. Hallways stretched pale and empty under the pale glow of security lights. Yet something shifted. At first, it was just a blur in the corner of a camera, a shadow that didn't belong. I leaned closer, breath warm against my own wrist, and it disappeared. I told myself it was a trick of the lights, static playing games, but the air pressed colder, heavier, as if aware I was watching. On the next screen, a figure crouched in the hallway, just past the corner, dark clothes, pale skin catching the faint luminescence. Eyes, I couldn't tell. They flickered with every passing frame. I swallowed dry, tasting the metallic edge of fear. The hum of the monitors pressed low in my chest. A soft rustle from behind me. I froze. The screen flickered again. The stranger had moved. Closer, closer still, to the point where I felt it might step into the room. I turned, slow. Nothing. Shadows pooled along the walls. I could smell paper, dust, and something faintly damp like cold stone. Back to the monitors. The figure now stood in the corner of my own room, though the door had been closed. A flicker, then gone. I could feel my heart hammer in the hollow of my chest. Every breath came shallow, sharp. The room felt smaller, air thick, heavy, pressing against my skin. I leaned toward the screen. Static thickened along the edges. A hand, pale and long-fingered, pressed briefly against the wall near my bed. And then nothing. I shivered. The monitor's light felt harsh, slicing shadows across the floor. A soft hum lingered, deeper now, as though the building itself breathed slow and patient. Another flicker. The stranger closer again. Closer still, in impossible steps. Eyes caught mine. If the feed was real, glinting faintly with something hungry. I looked away, back to the corner. Gone. Only shadows stretching into angles that didn't belong. The monitors pulsed faintly. I could hear the subtle clink of a pen shifting somewhere on the desk behind me. I dared not turn. The hum pressed in, low and persistent, like the whisper of a giant exhale. Another flicker. This time, right at the foot of the bed. I could make out the shape, taller, broader. Not quite human. Not quite empty. I could feel it in my spine, crawling, knotting the nerves into taut threads. Cold pressed at my shoulders, a breeze I could not place. The screen stuttered, static crawling over the stranger like frost. I wanted to step back, wanted to leave the monitors dark, but my eyes remained drawn to the flicker, the movement, the impossible closeness. The figure raised its hand slowly. Fingers curved, deliberate, toward me, toward the camera, toward me. A flash of light. The feed distorted. Static roared softly, humming in my ears. I closed my eyes briefly, counting breaths. When I opened them, the stranger was gone, not vanished entirely. The monitors showed the room empty, yet I felt it, lingering, close, patient, waiting. The screens flickered again. A subtle shadow stretched across the far wall, edges soft but deliberate. The room seemed colder now, tighter. I pressed my palms to the desk, fingertips brushing cold metal. A whisper of static pressed to my ears, indecipherable, patient. I felt the gaze behind the monitor, heavy, aware. The stranger moved in the feed again, closer than before, closer than should have been possible. I did not look at the other screens, focusing only on the one in front of me. And then nothing. The hum softened, the flicker faded, but the air pressed heavy, insistent. I leaned back, shaking slightly, breath warm against the cold of the monitors. The hallway looked empty again. The room looked empty. Yet I knew. I could feel it there, waiting, beyond the flicker, beyond the screens. The static lingered, faint and patient, soft like breath against a window. And I could not move. The night pressed cold against the walls. Fog curled outside, curling around the building like slow fingers. I sat alone, the monitors dead, screens blank, but the air hummed still. A breath shifted behind me, soft, deliberate. I did not turn. The room smelled faintly of paper and dust, but beneath it, something colder, damp, like stone left in the rain. A shadow shifted across the floor, subtle, slow. I thought it was mine, but it moved differently. Then the voice, a whisper, just beyond hearing, threading to the hum of silence. Goodbye. I froze, chest tightening, breath shallow. It lingered, stretching the word thin across the walls. Not harsh, not hurried, soft, careful, yet heavy, impossible to ignore. I felt in the room, around me, a presence that pressed close without form. Cold traced along my shoulders, down my arms, into the palms of my hands. I did not move. The lights flickered faintly above. Shadows pooled in corners that had no source, bending around each other, whispering angles my eyes could not follow. I heard soft footsteps behind the hum of nothing, brushing against the floor as though the air itself carried them. The whisper came again. "Goodbye!" A breath nearer now, brushing against my ear. A warmth that was not warmth. A pressure that was not pressure. And then silence. I dared not turn. The room felt longer, stretching past walls I knew were close. The hum of the building filled my ears, low and patient. Every shadow seemed to watch, folding over itself, waiting. A chair scraped softly behind me. Not clumsy, deliberate. I held my breath. The cold lingered along my spine, pressing against the small of my back. I looked at the window. Fog swirled lazily, reflecting pale light in unnatural angles. I could see nothing, yet knew the presence hovered there, just beyond glass, beyond sight. Another whisper, near the window this time, carried over the glass. "Goodbye." Soft as silk, sharp as a knife in the chest. The air tightened, pressing against my skin, chilling through my clothes, through my bones. I reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal of the desk. The faint rustle of paper answered. Objects shifted slightly, forming shapes just at the edge of understanding. Not deliberate, but deliberate enough to remind me I was never alone. The room seemed to inhale. The hum deepened. Shadows lengthened toward the corners of the walls, pulling into angles that had no source. I felt the presence move with them, brushing closer without a sound, without form. A breath against my neck. Faint, deliberate, heavy. The whisper again. "Goodbye." And then the air stilled. The room seemed empty. Yet I could feel it, weightless, patient, watching. Cold lingered in the corners, in the desk, in the hum beneath the walls. I dared to move my hand. Paper fluttered softly under my fingers. A shape seemed to ripple across the floor, just past my vision, gone when I looked directly. I whispered back, though no one could hear. "Goodbye." The word felt wrong, inadequate, swallowed by the presence pressing in. The fog outside shifted again. Moonlight glinted against its surface, pale, distant. The shadow lingered in the room, unmoving, patient. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat loud. I sat still, hands folded, listening. The whisper did not return. The chill remained. The sense of watching, patient and quiet, endured. The monitors remained dark. The hum beneath the walls persisted. The air held its weight, pressing, patient. I could not tell where the presence had gone, if it had gone at all. And then I understood. It had not left. It had only whispered farewell. A word, soft and final, yet unyielding. A reminder that some departures are only the beginning of a presence that lingers. The room felt impossibly still. Yet cold brushed my skin where warmth should have been. Shadows stretched, angles bending in ways my eyes could not trace. I did not move. Outside, fog drifted lazily against the glass. I could see the pale light stretched thin across its edges. And in that silence, I felt it, watching, patient. A farewell whispered, heavy with meaning, leaving the room and me unsettled. I drew my breath slow, careful. The cold lingered. The hum lingered. And I remained. The building sat quiet. Empty hallways stretched beneath pale light, the kind that seemed to tremble just at the edges of vision. I walked slowly, footsteps soft, careful, though I knew no one was near. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and cold metal, but beneath it, a trace of something else lingered, something sharp, watching. I paused at the stairwell. The hum of the building shifted, subtle, almost alive. Shadows clung to corners, gathering in angles the eye shouldn't follow. A cold breeze whispered past my cheek. I thought it was nothing, but it carried the faintest sense of breath, deliberate, patient. The hall stretched ahead, longer than memory allowed. I turned slowly, imagining the far end empty, unbroken, but something felt wrong. A presence pressed close, patient, unyielding. I stopped near a door. The handle gleamed pale in the dim light. I could sense it there, just beyond, watching through walls, through air, through shadows. Soft rustling came from above. Nothing stepped, nothing moved, yet the sense of weight pressed over my shoulders, settling into the pit of my stomach. I thought I saw in the corner, just beyond a stack of boxes, a shadow, thin, impossibly still. It did not move when I looked directly. It only pulled, waiting. I drew in a slow breath. Cold pressed against the back of my neck, brushing along my spine. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation, with patience. I tried to focus on the floor. The tiles stretched endless beneath my feet. Every shadow seemed to tilt toward me, bending just beyond understanding. A soft scrape. Paper shifting somewhere down the hall. Not hurried, not accidental, deliberate. I dare not look. The light flickered above. A hum joined the air, low and resonant. Shadows pulled more deeply, stretching edges past the walls, forming angles that should not exist. The sense of watching intensified, filling the room without moving. I whispered quietly under my breath, "Who's there?" No reply came, but I could feel it, presence heavy and patient, settling into corners, into cracks in the walls, into the small space between breaths. I moved a hand toward the desk at the end of the hall. Cold brushed the fingertips like a warning. Objects trembled, shifting into vague, impossible shapes. A glance confirmed nothing, yet everything had changed. Footsteps echoed above, heavy, deliberate, though the floors were empty. My chest tightened. Every nerve thrummed. Every sense stretched to the edges of reason. I stopped again. Shadows pressed closer, bending angles I knew to be impossible. The hum deepened, low, patient. And then silence. The presence lingered. Not moving, not retreating. Just watching. Waiting. I forced a breath. It carried weight, a pressure that pressed cold into my lungs. I could feel its gaze everywhere at once, threading to the walls, pulling over my skin. The hall seemed to pulse. Long stretches bent in subtle twists that made my eyes question, my mind hesitate. I could not place the source, yet I felt it in every corner, every shadow, every edge. A door creaked softly behind me. I did not turn. I knew where it came from. I knew who or what lingered. The air grew thicker, pressing against the chest, curling around the shoulders. I felt its patience like a weight, like cold water pressing over skin. It waited, watching. I whispered again, "Go!" The word fell hollow, swallowed by the presence that had no form, no shape, yet filled the room. Nothing answered. The shadows pulled closer, bending with impossible intent. Every corner seemed alive, every edge sharp, anticipating. I sat, finally, on the edge of the desk. Breath slow, deliberate. The hum persisted, low and patient. The cold lingered, brushing my arms, my neck, settling in the pit of my stomach. I could not see it, yet I felt it everywhere. And I understood. Alone does not mean without company. The shadow waits. Patient, unyielding, watching. I did not move. I did not breathe too loudly. The presence lingered. And I waited, too. The first light of morning touched the windows. Pale, soft, and hesitant. It did not chase the shadows entirely. They lingered, folded into corners, pressed against walls. The air smelled faintly of damp cement and dust. A breeze slipped through the cracks in the frame, carrying with it a cool, indifferent hush. The building seemed to exhale, slow and patient. I moved along the hallway, careful, soft footsteps over tiles that remembered the night's echoes. Everything was still, almost too still. Sunlight stretched across the floor, pale and thin. It illuminated the small disturbances. A shifted chair, a page curled in the desk, a lingering frost in the window frame. Each one a whisper of what had been. I paused by the stairwell. The hum that haunted the night was gone. Yet, in the quiet, I could feel its absence as sharply as its presence before. The air pressed gently against my skin. I breathed slowly, deliberately, tasting the cold, metallic tang. And I felt the memory of the hand, the shadows, the watching lingering. Light pulled in the corners, softening the shapes that had been impossible before. The edges of the walls, the angles of the ceiling. The length of the hall, all normal now, almost. Yet the sense of distortion remained, subtle, slipping at the edges of perception. I walked toward the break room. The door was closed. I did not expect it to open, but I approached carefully, hand brushing the cool metal handle. No one was inside. The shadows were just shadows. Still, they felt watched. A desk sat empty, yet items were shifted, pens aligned strangely. A notebook lay open, pages still trembling as if stirred by a quiet wind. I touched the surface lightly. Cold, solid, indifferent. No shape remained, no presence. I moved through the hall, toward the window. The frost had melted, leaving only the faintest trace of patterns. Patterns that seemed to recede when I looked too closely. I stood still, listening. The silence filled every crevice. Outside, the fog was lifting. The city was waking slowly, unaware. Bird song struggled against the distance, faint, disjointed, almost alien in its calm. I breathed it in, the warmth of the sun beginning to brush my face. The memory of night's terror lingered like a scent, cold hands brushing my shoulder, footsteps echoing from empty floors, eyes in corners that vanished when stared at, the sense of being watched everywhere and nowhere. I closed my eyes, counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm anchored me. The building remained still, patient, indifferent. I realized the shadow was not gone. It had simply withdrawn, waiting for a moment that would never come. The walls were ordinary now. The ceilings flat, familiar. Sunlight filled the hall with softness. But even in brightness, I felt its weight, subtle and constant. I sat at the desk in the empty office, fingers brushing over smooth, cold surfaces. The objects lay in quiet repose, no longer gathering unnaturally, no longer shifting with purpose. Just still. Outside, the city breathed, distant, unknowing. I imagined the shadows slipping back into corners, into walls, into the space between thoughts. I could feel its patience, its presence lingering like a weight on air. A deep, slow inhale, a release. The morning light continued to stretch across the hall, softening everything it touched. I understood then. Acceptance is quiet. It does not erase memory. It does not chase shadows. It sits alongside them, patient and steady. I rose slowly, feeling the cold beneath my feet. The hall stretched familiar, normal, but with the residue of night still settled in corners. I walked to the stairwell and paused. One last glance at the emptiness, the stillness. The sun warmed my cheek. I breathed in again, tasting the calm. The building was empty. I was alone. But I carried a memory, the shadow that lingered in the spaces between light and dark. The hallway stretched ahead, still, quiet, waiting, and I stepped forward. The memory of the night would remain, a shadow folded into morning, faint and persistent, and I moved through it, carrying the weight lightly, slowly, deliberately, alone, yet surviving. The window reflected my pale face, empty, calm, and unafraid. The shadow lingered behind the edges of vision, but for now it waited. I exhaled. The morning was still, and so was I,